There comes a point where a man stops being carried by agreement. Not the loud kind. Not the kind people celebrate. The quiet agreement that lived underneath his whole life. If I stay reliable, I stay included. If I stay easy, I stay safe. If I keep the temperature down, I keep my place. For a long time, that agreement feels like social intelligence. It feels like maturity. It feels like being good with people. Then something changes. Not because the man becomes arrogant. Not because he becomes cold. Because he becomes exact. He notices where he laughs to stay welcome. He notices where he nods to avoid friction. He notices where he shrinks to keep the room comfortable. And he cannot unsee it. The moment approval falls away doesn't arrive inside breakdown. It arrives after rebuilding. After you've done enough work to feel your own spine again. After you have stopped lying in the obvious ways. After you have started paying attention to the small ways. You feel it in ordinary moments. A conversation that used to be casual starts draining you. A joke that used to slide now lands like an insult you participated in. A room you once called home begins to feel like a contract written in invisible ink. And you realize something totally brutal. You were not loved for who you were. You were tolerated for how adjustable you were. That realization is the beginning of standing alone. Not as a lifestyle, as a consequence. Because once you stop pretending, you stop fitting. Pain is a known language. Most men can interpret pain. Most men can endure pain. Pain has shape. Pain has a story. Pain has witnesses. Standing alone is different. Standing alone is not pain with a villain. It's loss without drama. It's distance without a fight. It's the slow disappearance of old access. Pain still makes you feel connected to something, even if it's connected through difficulty or conflict, even if it's connected through dependence, even if it's connected through being needed. Standing alone feels like the opposite of being needed. It feels like air where a structure used to be, and the body does not experience that as growth. The body experiences that as a threat, because for most of human history, being outside meant exposure. No group meant no food. No group meant no protection. No group meant you slept with one eye open. So when a man risks approval, his nervous system doesn't register integrity. It registers danger. That's why this phase comes with strange symptoms. You want to explain yourself before anyone asks. You want to smooth things over prematurely. You want to be misunderstood less than you want to be true. You want to return to the old tone because the old tone felt like safety. And this is where men mistake the signal. They think that anxiety means I am wrong. I am being too much. I am overreacting. I am too emotional. But often it simply means I am no longer trading myself for belonging, and the body is learning that this won't kill me. Standing alone is a nervous system education, not a mindset or a productivity hack. There is a fake version of standing alone. It is adolescent isolation. It is pride disguised as strength. It is the I don't need anyone phase and posture. That is not this. Standing alone in its real form is quieter and more difficult. It's not I don't need you. It's I won't purchase closeness by abandoning myself. It's refusal. Refusal to dilute truth for entry. Refusal to lower standards for comfort. Refusal to perform a version of yourself that keeps everyone relaxed but costs you something. A man in this phase isn't trying to be superior. He's trying to be undivided. Because division is expensive. Splitting costs energy. A split identity costs sleep. A split self costs voice. You can hear it in men who are still negotiating. Their words sound careful. Their meaning arrives late. They apologize for their own boundaries before they state them. They talk around the truth as if the truth is a rude guest. Standing alone is the point where that stops. Not with aggression, with precision and clarity. A man doesn't become harsh, he becomes clean. Not perfect, clean. One self, one direction, one center. And the room immediately feels that. The pushback rarely arrives as an obvious confrontation. It arrives as social weather. Fewer invitations, less warmth in the voice. A slight pause before someone replies to you. A new awkwardness where there used to be flow and connection. And then the comments begin. You have changed. You are intense lately. You used to be easier. Why are you making everything so serious? Are you okay? Sometimes it is framed as care. Sometimes as humor. Sometimes as disappointment. But underneath, it is the same request. Come back to being manageable. Because when you stop bending, people become aware of their own bending. Not because you are judging them, because you are no longer collaborating with the lie. A man who stops participating in performance agreement changes the whole atmosphere of the room. He becomes a mirror without trying to be. And most people do not like mirrors. So naturally they test him, not by attacking him directly. That would be far too honest for them. They test him by creating a subtle choice. Will he stay true and lose ease, or will he return to ease and lose himself? This is the real question of the phase. Can he hold a line without reinforcement? Not applause, not validation, not even understanding, just a line. Most men do not admit how much their behavior is shaped by one invisible contract. If I stay agreeable, I stay connected. Agreeable doesn't mean kind. Agreeable means safe to have around. And safe means predictable. Safe means compliant. Safe means not too honest. A man can spend years becoming safe, a whole lifetime even. He learns timing, he learns tone, he learns jokes that disarm. He learns how to absorb tension so other people don't have to feel it. He learns how to be useful, and usefulness becomes a substitute for belonging. Until one day, he realizes he has been paying for connection with self-erasure his whole life. Standing alone is the moment he tears up the contract. Not with drama and bravado, with non-participation. He stops laughing when it costs him. He stops nodding when it corrodes him. He stops offering himself as a cushion for other people's discomfort. This is where a lot of men return to normal. They call it being reasonable, mature, socially dynamic. They call it being flexible. They call it not making it a thing. But what they're really doing is renewing the contract on the old terms. Standing alone is the moment he chooses not to renew. And yes, it costs. People like to make this phase mythic. The lone wolf, the warrior path, the king in the desert. Most of that is performance. The truth is much simpler. A man cannot become reliable while he is governed by social permission. Reliability requires the ability to disappoint people without collapsing. That is it. If a man cannot tolerate being disliked, he will always be steerable. If he cannot tolerate misunderstanding, he will always soften truth into something digestible. If he cannot tolerate distance, he will always re-enter situations that cost him. Standing alone is the training ground where those tolerances are built. Not as motivation, as survival of the self. The desert isn't actually a place. It's the period where nothing reassures you. You wake up and there is no immediate evidence that you made the right decision. No pat on the back. You act with integrity and no one thanks you. You leave a room and nobody chases you. And you learn to let that be. That is the forging process. It is not glamorous. It is not cinematic. It is mundane. It feels like leaving early and not explaining why. It feels like letting someone be disappointed and not rescuing them. It feels like holding a boundary and not over-talking it. It feels like walking home after a normal day and realizing you're not going to be rewarded for being true. The absence of reward is the shock, because men are conditioned to believe that good behavior earns safety. Standing alone breaks that expectation. At first, it feels empty, but then something starts to happen under the surface. Your attention returns. Your energy stops leaking into impression management. Your decisions become less crowded. Your body becomes less jumpy around other people's reactions. You stop monitoring. You stop pre-editing yourself. You start living as if your center is not up for negotiation. This is not confidence. It's the end of dependency on permission. There is a stage here that humbles men. You hold the line, and the world does not respond. No dramatic consequence. No reward. No clear sign. Just a slow quiet. This is where most men walk back into the old rooms. Not because they hate themselves, because they expected reality to give them feedback. Earlier stages have feedback. If you are chaotic, life reacts. If you are reactive, relationships flare. If you are collapsing, people or institutions intervene. Standing alone often produces nothing visible at first. That silence is the test. Because silence is where doubt grows. The mind starts to manufacture questions. What if I am the problem? What if I am becoming rigid? What if I am just lonely and calling it integrity? What if I have misread everything? And sometimes, those questions contain something useful. But most of the time, they are just the old system trying to restore the old contract. Standing alone asks a man to do something most men avoid. Hold steady without narrative. No story about being strong. No story about being chosen. No story about being special. Just steady, just consistent, just aligned. And that is rare. Most men think temptation will look like indulgence. But in this phase, temptation often looks like intelligence. It looks like nuance. It looks like maybe you are overdoing it. It looks like maybe you could just soften slightly. It doesn't arrive as sin. It arrives as a reasonable compromise. And the compromise is usually small. A laugh that isn't real. A silence where truth should have landed. A slight shift of tone so you are easier to handle. The problem with small compromises is that they do not feel like betrayal. They feel like social maturity, social skill, until you notice what they cost. Your voice gets thinner, your body gets noisier, You start rehearsing again. You start scanning again. Standing alone teaches a man to recognize this early. Not morally, physiologically. He starts to feel the difference between truth and accommodation in his body. That becomes a new kind of integrity, not a concept, a signal. One of the hardest parts of standing alone is being misinterpreted. Not by strangers, by people you used to be close to. They interpret clarity as coldness. They interpret boundaries as distance. They interpret refusal as judgment. The old version of you wants to make sure nobody thinks you are a bad man, because your image used to be your protection. Standing alone is where a man stops using image as armor. He speaks once. He states reality without over-decorating it. He lets people have their own reaction. This is not cruelty. This is a sign of maturity. Because if your boundary requires continued persuasion to stand, it isn't a boundary, it's a discussion. And discussion is where a man gets rented again. So he learns to tolerate something unfamiliar, being misunderstood by people who refuse to see. Not forever, but long enough that truth stops being dependent on reception. A man can talk about not caring what people think. The body will expose him. The body doesn't care about philosophy. The body cares about threat. And disapproval triggers an ancient code. You check your phone. You replay the conversation. You draft explanations in your head before arrival. You wonder if you should reach out to smooth it over. That is not weakness. That is a nervous system that learned connection equals safety. Standing alone is the slow rewriting of that ancient code. And rewriting doesn't happen by insight. It happens by repetition and habit. You feel the alarm. You don't obey it. You survive the social coldness. You realize you are still alive. You realize you did not die from being disliked. Then you do it again. Eventually, the alarm quiets down. Not because you are numb, because you are no longer governed by it. A lot of men get pulled back by guilt. Not guilt as conscience, guilt as leverage. It often wears the costume of care. I am worried about you. You are pushing people away. You are going to become too lonely. You are shutting down. Why are you so intense? Sometimes it is sincere. Sometimes it is manipulative. But either way, it places pressure on your center and tests your sacred spine. The subtext is, return to the old version of you that made this relationship easy. Standing alone is where a man learns to hear subtext without reacting to it. He doesn't become dismissive or distant. He doesn't lecture. He simply recognizes. This is the world asking for access. and he decides what access costs. If the price is self-abandonment, he does not pay. Standing alone does not mean permanent solitude, but it changes how you re-enter life. You don't go back the same. You can walk into the old rooms, but you feel them differently now. Because now you notice the toll, the old jokes, the old dynamics, the old role you used to play. You might even try it once, not as relapse, but as test, and the result is immediate. Your chest tightens, your voice shifts, you become less direct. You start performing again. That isn't drama, that is data. Standing alone teaches you what environments cost you. And once you know the cost, you stop acting surprised. You stop calling it bad luck. You stop calling it people problems. You call it what it is. This place requires a version of me I am not willing to become again. And you leave. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes permanently. Not to punish anyone. This is not a vindictive stance. This is to protect the sacred spiritual center. As the noise drops, your social world shrinks. Not because you are superior, because you are no longer compatible with certain dynamics. And this is where something changes. You meet fewer people, but you meet real people. Men who don't need you to be funny. Men who do not need you to be easy. Men who do not need you to carry the mood. They can sit in the quiet without panicking. They can handle directness without taking it as violence. They can hear no without turning it into a betrayal. This is what brotherhood actually is. Not a vibe, shared reality. Shared consequence, shared discipline. Men who have paid a price and don't demand reimbursement. And when you find those men, you realize standing alone was not the end of connection. It was the end of cheap connection. There is a point where a man stops hoping the room will understand him. Before the line is, I hope they get it. I hope they see that I actually mean well. I hope this doesn't change things. And after, the line becomes, I am clear. Not because clarity makes you invincible, because clarity stops you bargaining. A man who crosses that line becomes harder to manipulate. Not because he is aggressive, because he is not available for the old contract. He does not audition for belonging. He does not pay for proximity with self-respect. He becomes rooted. Rootedness isn't a mood. It's the ability to remain yourself when the room disapproves. That is when leadership begins. Not leadership as control, not leadership as arrogance, leadership as reliability. Standing alone is not a finish line. It is the cost of becoming undivided. It is what happens when a man decides he would rather be true than be held. It strips away the relationships that required him to be negotiable. It strips away the habits that kept him socially safe but internally fractured. And yes, it can feel like a loss, because it is a loss, but it is not the loss of love. It is the loss of a system built on self-erasure, lack of self-respect, and self-betrayal. What comes after standing alone is not guaranteed, but what becomes possible is clean, honest connection, real brotherhood. Work that doesn't require you to be two men. Work that doesn't require you to split your soul. A nervous system that no longer confuses approval with oxygen. This is the price. Not paid once, paid repeatedly. Every time you refuse to buy belonging with self-betrayal. And if you're here, you already know. The old contract is expired. You can sign it again, or you can stand alone.